All right, welcome everyone. Thanks so much for joining us tonight for our August Zero Waste Task Force. Tonight we're talking about the air permits for the trash incinerator. And we're being joined by Senator Pete Harckham, as well as representatives from the New York State Department of Environmental Conservation. Tonight's icebreaker that you can share in the chat is, did you take a vacation? And if so, where'd you go? And then the usual, your name and organization and where you're joining us from.
Gary, now it's me. Can I call you back? I'm in a webinar. Thank you.
All right. Good evening, everyone. We're going to give it a couple minutes for everybody to join before we get started. Thanks for joining us. Tonight's icebreaker is, did you take a vacation? And if so, where'd you go? Oh, Julie went to Paris. That's fabulous. I have a friend who left today for Paris, and they're in between the Olympics and the Paralympics, which I guess is probably a calmer time to be there. All right, welcome new folks to our August Zero Waste Task Force meeting. Tonight we're talking about air permits. We're being joined by Senator Pete Harckham and representatives from the New York State Department of Environmental Conservation. While we wait for critical mass, please use the chat to introduce yourself, your name and organization if you're associated with one, and your location. And then our icebreaker for tonight is, did you take a vacation? And if so, where'd you go? Oh, Annika, Maine is gorgeous. I actually did also take a vacation to Maine in July. It was really nice. And just a plug for folks, we do have a YouTube channel that we'll drop the link into the chat. All of our Zero Waste Task Force meetings are recorded and they're put there. So if you missed one and you'd like to go back and watch, we have topics like basic teach-ins on incineration and the waste system. We've done programs on composting, how to do it, whether you live in an apartment or in a house, or you want to do it through your municipality. We've done some on PFAS from trash incinerators, like the concerns around that. So there's a wealth of information there from our past Zero Waste Task Force meetings that you can check out. And you can just search for Westchester Alliance for Sustainable Solutions on YouTube, and our channel will come up. And for new folks joining, welcome, and please introduce yourself in the chat. Our icebreaker for tonight is, did you take a vacation? And if so, where'd you go? All right, so I think it is 7:35 and I want to be respectful of everyone's time. So I'm going to go ahead and get started. My name is Courtney Williams. I am the founder of WAS, Westchester Alliance for Sustainable Solutions. WAS is an alliance of community organizations from across Westchester County working to close the Wheelabrator trash incinerator in Peekskill and move Westchester County towards zero waste and Peekskill towards environmental justice. So our agenda for tonight, I'm doing the welcome right now. I'll give a little bit of background just to position our conversation. Then we'll hear from State Senator Pete Harcum, who represents SD 40, which is my district and the district within which Wheelabrator is located, to talk about the work that his office has been doing to help constituents get involved in this process of the permit renewal. Then we're joined by two representatives from the New York State DEC, which is Department of Environmental Conservation. They are the state agency that's tasked with issuing this permit. And so we'll get some background on the process from John Petronella, who's the Assistant Regional Director for Region 3, that's this region. And then an overview of the permit process under the CLCPA from Mark Lonzafame. That's really important because the CLCPA is new, and so a lot of this process is new. Then we'll have time for discussion and close out with taking action as always. So with that, just the main take-home message, if you want to know the details of trash incineration and why it's bad, are remembering the 3 Ps. It's bad for people, it's bad for the planet, and it's bad for our pocketbooks. It's bad for people because it is the largest industrial air polluter in Westchester County. Westchester gets an F from the American Lung Association for ground level ozone, and emissions of the type that Wheelabrator emits contribute to that ground level ozone. Peekskill residents have increased rates of health problems that science directly links to air pollution. So we have people being hurt by breathing this air pollution every day. It's bad for the planet because it is the largest industrial source of greenhouse gas emissions in Westchester County, and proper handling of waste can dramatically reduce greenhouse gas emissions by like composting. So it's really bad for our planet and much worse than landfills. It's bad for our pocketbooks because historically incineration is the most expensive way to manage waste. Our trash incinerator is 40 years old. If it finishes its current contract with Westchester County, it will be tied as the oldest trash incinerator in the whole country. And we are not lucky enough to have the Methuselah of trash incinerators that will just last forever and ever. So we need the county, instead of being caught on the hook to dispose of over 2,000 tons of trash a day, we need the county and the city of Peekskill looking ahead now to invest in zero waste solutions that are long-term and self-sustaining. So what are Title V air permits? So Title V air permits are required under the Clean Air Act, which is from the EPA, the Environmental Protection Agency, for major emitters, meaning major sources of air pollution. And this map shows where in Westchester County we have Title V emitters. If they're listed in italics, with a date, with a year after, it means the permit is expired in the year in which it expired. And what you can see from the map is we've got a cluster in Peekskill or around Peekskill and a cluster in Yonkers. And you can also see we've got a bunch of expired permits. So the county's permit for the Yonkers wastewater treatment plant expired in 2019. And then the 2 Title V emitters in Peekskill, both of their permits are expired. The BASF chemical plant, that's $1 billion corporation, their permit expired in 2017. The wind waste trash incinerator, their permit expired in 2021. Pete Harcum and our assemblywoman at the time, Sandy Galiff, who has now been retired for several years, came out straight away when that permit expired to call for public hearings. We now have Dana Levenberg in office. It has been that long that this permit has been expired. And that means that these emitters, these polluters, are allowed to keep operating under their current permits. So in the case of BASF, they're operating based on a permit issued in 2012 with 2012 emissions standards. A lot has changed in over a decade in terms of emissions, and hopefully the DEC representatives can lay out some of those changes for us. So Wheelabrator's permit expired in 2021. It's under renewal now. The Climate Leadership and Community Protection Act has passed and now has new requirements. So we'll get some details on that from the DEC tonight. But you saw those clusters, one in Yonkers, one in Peekskill. This is not unusual. Environmental justice communities are predominantly Black and brown, and they bear an undue burden of air pollution. So this is data from the proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences. And what you can see is that Latinx Americans are exposed to 63% more air pollution than you would expect if it was equitably distributed. Black Americans are exposed to 56% more air pollution, and white Americans are exposed to negative 17%. So we are actively putting polluters and pollution in Black and brown communities, and kind of at their expense so that white Americans don't need to breathe this. Peekskill has, my census tract is on this map. This is from the New York State Disadvantaged Communities Criteria. That is my census tract. And what you can see is that Peekskill has a higher environmental burden than 98% of census tracts in New York State. And our population is more vulnerable than 84% of census tracts statewide. So that means our burden of pollution, which you can see in the yellow-orange color, you can see municipal solid waste combustors. We have 92, we're higher than 92% of census tracts. Industrial manufacturing, higher than 82%. But in terms of the health burdens, you can see high rates of heart attack, asthma, COPD, low birth weight, all things directly linked to air pollution of the kind that BASF and Wheelabrator emit. And our population is vulnerable. So energy poverty, meaning folks that can't pay their electric bills for heating and cooling, more vulnerable than 94% of the population, which means if the air quality is bad, if there's a lot of air pollution outside and you can't afford your bill, maybe you don't close the windows and turn on the air conditioning. You leave the windows open and bring that air pollution into your home. So with that, and a reminder that this incinerator is 40 years old, and these are some of the stats of how much, estimates of how much pollution it's generated in the 40 years. I'm going to stop sharing my screen and invite Senator Harckham to speak. Thanks so much, Pete, for joining us tonight.
Courtney, thank you so much for the invitation. Thank you for your leadership. Thank you for your partnership. Thank you to all of you who are on for all of your advocacy. Just so you know that Courtney is in regular touch with our office. Great partnership. Just very top line, as Courtney mentioned, 2 years ago, Sandy Galiff and I did call for public hearings and a public engagement process. Dana Levenberg has now picked up that charge. Now that Sandy's retired, Dana's been a great partner. And DEC shortly thereafter did require a public engagement process. And they have been going back and forth with Wheelabrator on the different drafts. So the way it works is Wheelabrator puts together what they think because the responsibility is on the company. So the company will put together a draft of the program. They send it to DEC. DEC sends back comments. And just so you know, the folks at DEC are terrific. You know, as chair of environmental conservation, I deal with all the different departments over at DEC, and the folks are just terrific. They're diligent. You know, we can say it here, they're overworked, they're understaffed, and they just do amazing work. So they've been working back and forth with Wheelabrator on this process. I'm sure they'll give you a bit more of the inside information on that. But that process is ongoing. Hopefully, it will come to an end quite soon, and then Wheelabrator will be charged with implementing the public engagement process. So all of you have an opportunity to weigh in on the public permit process, where you can, you know, put on the record, you know, the types of information that Courtney just laid out. And, you know, these are challenging issues. You know, the state is running out of landfill space. You know, what do we do with the waste? We know the challenges and the problems inherent with waste incineration. So it's challenging. And so, you know, to the organization's point, zero waste is really where we need to get to. And, you know, I want to thank all of you for your advocacy. Last year, we had the Packaging Reduction and Recycling Infrastructure Act that many of you very actively supported. And we got that through in the Senate. It was a monstrous fight, I must say. And we took on some of the largest companies and industries in the world. They were in opposition to that bill because it would change the way that they would have to do business and put the onus on them for the packaging and the ways that they produce. So so we got to pass in the Senate. We didn't get it done in the Assembly. So we got to go back and do it all over again next year. But at least we laid out the template. So we're very proud of that. We want to thank all of you. The other thing is, Courtney mentioned about the Title V permitters who are operating with an expired permit. 2023, the comptroller put a report out on that. At the end of last year, we got some legislation drafted on that we'll be rolling out next year to really address some of the concerns laid out in the comptroller's report. So these companies can't go on indefinitely with an expired permit. So you'll hear more about that next year. When session starts in January, we'll roll that out. But in the meantime, we continue to work with you and advocate on your behalf with DEC to get the public engagement process rolling. And if there's anything you need, obviously, Courtney knows how to get a hold of us. And to all of you who may want to reach out to us, very simple, harcum@nysenate.gov.
Thank you so much, Pete, for your continued advocacy. And we're going to be a partner in getting that legislation passed so that we can't just let these polluters, keep going indefinitely. And we need the DEC to have the staff and the resources to enforce the laws that we work so hard to get passed. So thank you so much.
And that's a challenge every year at budget season is, we have been adding to DEC. They have been growing back to where they need to be. We have more work to do there to give them the resources that they need to do what we ask them to do. But the folks who are there are doing an amazing job.
Great. And it looks like for time, I see we have a hand raised. Richard, if you want to put your question in the chat and Pete has a moment to answer it, he can do that in the chat. But for time, I want to keep us moving along because we do have some valuable presentations from the DEC coming up next. And I did forget to say something in my introduction, which is that, but Pete brought it up, which is that it is the Wheelabrator Wind Waste Corporation that's responsible for applying for this permit. But it is Westchester County Industrial Development Agency that owns the incinerator and contracts with Wind Waste to operate it. And, I don't know how, but nobody at the county thought to include anything in the contract about timely applications or any penalties for not getting things done in a timely manner. So the county didn't write anything protective of public health into the contract, but there's a lot in there protecting Wheelabrator's bottom line. So that was really a missed opportunity for our elected officials to advocate on our behalf. So with that, I would like to introduce John Petronella from the DEC. He is the Assistant Regional Director of DEC Region 3. And he is going to talk about the ongoing permit renewal process. So John, take it away.
Sure. Thank you. Can everyone hear me? Perfect.
Yes, we can.
Perfect. First, thank you so much, Courtney, for inviting the department to speak this evening. Thank you, Senator Harcum, for those kind words about the DEC. I can definitely tell you we have a great team here that's working hard on many permit applications throughout the region. So thank you again. As Courtney said, I'm the Assistant Regional Director for Region 3, which covers 7 counties in the Hudson Valley, including Westchester County. Also joining me is Mark Lanzafame, Chief Permitting and Compliance Section, Division of Air Resources out of our central office. And thanks to Westchester Alliance for Sustainable Solutions for inviting us. I first just wanted to give a brief overview of what we all call the Wheelabrator facility, and the department's jurisdiction over it. Wheelabrator, as I'm sure everyone on the call knows, is a waste to energy facility located in the city of Peekskill. Many will call it a waste combustor or an incinerator, all correct terms. This specific facility has 4 separate permits from the department to operate. One of those permits is the solid waste management facility permit, sometimes known as a Part 360 permit. Part 360 are the regulations that govern solid waste management facilities. This permit authorizes the facility to accept and process up to 755,000 tons of MSW, municipal solid waste, per year, which is equal to about 14,230 tons per week. So close to that 2,000 a day you rattled off, Courtney. This permit was last renewed in February of 2020 and expires in February 2025. Another permit that the facility has is a water withdrawal permit for the intake of up to 55 million gallons per day from the Hudson for cooling purposes. This permit was last renewed in July 2021 and expires in July 2026. Third permit is a Speedies permit, or a state pollutant discharge elimination system for wastewater, stormwater discharges, including the cooling water. This permit was last renewed July 2021 and expires June 2026. And finally, the Air Title V permit, which is currently up for renewal, is for the operation of 3 identical municipal solid waste combustors. Each combustor is rated at 750 tons per day. And as mentioned, this permit is currently up for renewal. I did want to point out something very important with regard to permit expiration. I want to be clear that this permit has not expired, and that's due to something called State Administrative Procedures Act, or SAPA. And what this means is when a timely and sufficient application for renewal is submitted, the existing permit does not expire until the department has made a final decision on the renewal application. During this time, the conditions of the permit remain in effect. The Wheelabrator facility did in fact submit a timely and sufficient application, and accordingly, the Air Title V for Wheelabrator is SAPA extended and not expired. I just want to make that clear. Most importantly, the Wheelabrator renewal application is currently under review and no final decisions have been made. There will be opportunity for public review and comment if the department proceeds with what we call a notice of complete application, which we have not done at this time. Also mentioned by Senator Harcum, because this facility is located in an environmental justice area, there will be what's called enhanced public outreach. And that's what Senator Harcum referred to, that we're going back and forth with Wheelabrator on. It's called an enhanced public participation plan. And we're trying to get this plan right, ensuring we have all identified stakeholders so we can ensure when this process moves forward, there's substantial public engagement from you folks. That's essentially the background on that I wanted to cover on our jurisdiction. And I know, Courtney, one of the other components, your interest was on how the state reviews applications pursuant to CLCPA. And And Mark, if you're ready, I wanted to turn it over to Mark Lanzafame, who has, hopefully he can share his screen. Hopefully he has permission to give a brief presentation on CLCPA and how it relates to our review of these applications.
Yep, I should be good here. Let's see. Hopefully everybody's seeing my slides. We good?
Yes, looks good. Thank you.
All right, perfect. All right, hi everybody. I'm Mark Lanzafame. I am the chief of the permitting and compliance section in Division of Air Resources. I appreciate you inviting us tonight, and I'll talk a little bit about air permitting under the CLCPA. I will, just to sort of start here, I will say I am talking about air permitting. Yes, CLCPA applies to the other permits that John mentioned. Each division here under our Commissioner's Policy 49 was sort of tasked with coming up with their own sort of approach to addressing CLCPA. So how the other DEC programs look at climate information when their permits are up for renewal may be slightly different than what you're about to hear from me. But without further ado, I'll jump right in. Just real quick, some basics about the CLCPA itself, if you're not familiar. What it does is set economy-wide, so these apply to the whole state, greenhouse gas emissions reduction requirements. Those are 40% below 1990 emission levels by 2030, and 85% below 1995 emission levels by 2050. It also has a sort of separate goal of zero emissions from the electricity generation sector by 2040. If you're curious what those limits are in metric tons, it's a big number. Won't spoil that too much for you, but you can find that in our Part 496 regulation. So CLCPA itself has a whole bunch of parts. The first sort of part of it is all the stuff about the scoping plan, the Climate Action Council, and the Climate Justice Working Group, that sort of stuff, which you may have heard about before. But when it comes to permitting, really what we're looking at is Section 7. In particular, Section 7.2 and 7.3. So what Section 7.2 requires is for state agencies, so that includes DEC, to evaluate our administrative decisions like issuing permits in this case, for consistency with the attainment of those statewide greenhouse gas emission goals I mentioned on the previous slide. If we find that our decision would be inconsistent with the attainment of those goals, we're tasked with providing a justification for why we're making the decision anyway, despite that inconsistency. And then if a justification is available, we're also charged with identifying alternatives and mitigation measures that will be required for the project. And I'll sort of get into what all that means a little bit later on here. The second part of Section 7 that's important for us is Section 7.3. What that requires the agencies to do is evaluate our administrative decisions like issuing permits to ensure that they don't disproportionately burden disadvantaged communities. And then we're also charged with prioritizing reductions of greenhouse gases and co-pollutant emissions in disadvantaged communities. So to implement these two sections, there's a couple of DEC policies that we've put out to sort of lay out the requirements for applicants to provide us with information so that we can make these decisions that the law charges us to make. The first one of those policies is our DAR 21 policy. That was developed to implement the requirements of Section 7.2 for air permitting. We adopted it December 14th, 2022. And what it does is it requires the applicant to provide project-specific information to inform that evaluation under Section 7.2 that I mentioned a minute ago. It applies very broadly to new Title V and state facility permits, modifications to Title V and state facility permits, permit renewals, like what we're talking about here, and air facility registrations where we feel it's necessary to apply it. Under DAR 21, what we look at is, or what we ask the applicant rather to look at, is the project that they're proposing. So if this was a new facility or a modification to the facility, they would look at any new or modified equipment that has greenhouse gas emissions. And that would include emissions from control equipment and what we call exempt activities under our permitting program. We also ask the applicant to look at indirect emissions from changes in truck traffic or things like that. For permit renewals, like this one, the project in quotes there is the entire facility. So Wheelabrator will look at their entire facility. The analysis itself, what DAR 21 requires them to include, is calculations and some discussion showing their direct greenhouse gas emissions. So that's from their equipment, the incinerators, any other equipment they may have. And we also ask them to calculate and show their upstream greenhouse gas emissions. So those are emissions that are associated with extraction, transmission, and use of fossil fuels at the facility, and use of any electricity that's imported from out of state. Most of the electricity that folks use is purchased from the local utility that's generated in state. So this doesn't come up very often, that component of it. But it is a requirement of CLCPA. So if it was known that there was out of state electricity being used, they would have to include those upstream emissions as well. The analysis is also required to include downstream greenhouse gas emissions. Most often, these are emissions from transmission and use of renewable natural gas or fossil fuels like regular natural gas. As such, you really only see downstream emissions generally with gas transmission projects. Something like Wheelabrator would not have any downstream emissions associated with it. And we don't look at things like shipment of goods or use of products that a facility produces. We also ask the applicant to consider their indirect greenhouse gas emissions. Most often, this is changes in truck traffic and stuff like that. It could be other things that sort of indirectly relate from their operations, but most of the time we're talking about vehicle traffic here. Next, we ask them to think ahead, think about those 2030, 2040 if they're in the energy sector, and 2050 goals. Think if there's any changes that they know of on the horizon that might affect their greenhouse gas emissions, that kind of thing. That's just to help us with our sort of consistency determination. And then the last two pieces are alternatives and mitigation measures, as I mentioned above, and I have some more detailed slides on those. So what are alternatives? If the project that's being proposed would result in an increase in greenhouse gas emissions, we ask the applicant to consider potential alternatives to that project. And then if there are no potential alternatives, we ask them to consider mitigation measures. So those could be an alternative to the entire project. Maybe they do something different. Maybe there's a different piece of equipment they could use, a different process material, something like that would reduce greenhouse gas emissions. That's what we ask them to consider. Once they've considered those things, we ask them to discuss the feasibility or infeasibility of them, give us a reason why you can't or can do this. And then we evaluate those on a case-by-case basis. So what may be infeasible at one facility could be feasible at another. That's something we consider, based on the project we're looking at. So after alternatives, we ask them to consider mitigation measures. So, assuming they don't identify any suitable alternatives, mitigation is sort of the next step. And this is, some sort of action that would reduce the impact or magnitude of greenhouse gas emissions from the project, either directly or indirectly. So that could be, controls, some sort of, project like solar panels, something like that would reduce the greenhouse gas emissions from the project. Once again, just like alternatives, we ask them to discuss the feasibility or infeasibility of any potential mitigation measures they may identify. And we, again, evaluate that on a case-by-case basis. Mitigation has some requirements on it under the CLCPA and under our policy. Those are that it has to occur at or near the project location. So it's not, for example, it would not be sufficient for a company to do a mitigation project in Buffalo for a facility here in Peekskill. It has to be, nearby. It also has to go beyond what they're already required to do by law or regulation. So if they have some sort of greenhouse gas limit or some sort of control device or whatever that's required of them by an existing law or regulation, that would not count as mitigation. And then the last requirement is that it has to be permanent, quantifiable, verifiable, and enforceable. So what that means is, it has to be something tangible. We don't generally accept things like third-party carbon credits or, a big donation to like buy up forest land or something like that. It has to be something that DEC can, reasonably determine that the facility has actually implemented. Transitioning here to section 7.3, we have our DEP 24.1 policy, which was developed to implement the requirements of section 7.3. That you'll note that the policy I was just talking about a minute ago, DAR 21, that DAR for Division of Air Resources. This one's DEP for Division of Environmental Permits. So this policy is more broadly applicable to other types of permits as well. It was adopted in May 8th, 2024, so not that long ago, just a couple months. It applies to projects located in or potentially impacting disadvantaged communities. And just like DAR 21, it requires the applicant to provide project-specific information to inform our disproportionate burden evaluation. In terms of applicability, since, like I said, since this one's more broad, it has more broad applicability. So it applies to all major permit applications as described in Part 621, that's the Uniform Procedures Act. And that includes modifications and renewals. And then it also applies to other projects administered under Part 621. So like something like a Title V facility permit renewal would be a major project under Part 621. The project scope that DEP 24 looks at is, again, very similar to what we talked about for DAR 21. It's activities of a continuing nature and any new activities that would result in an actual increase in greenhouse gases or co-pollutants over currently permitted levels. Just like DAR 21, we look at stationary and mobile sources that are directly related and essential to the proposed action, whatever that may be. Just like DAR 21, DEP 24 has some requirements for the analysis itself. It requires the applicant to prepare a disproportionate burden analysis, which discusses the greenhouse gas and co-pollutant emissions from the project. It should include relevant baseline data on any existing burdens that may exist for the community that's impacted. And they should evaluate how the project or how the greenhouse gas and co-pollutant emissions from the project would affect that community. And then the second sort of part of that is what DEP 24 calls project design considerations. You can think of this sort of like mitigation under section 7.2. The difference here is CLCPA itself doesn't use the word mitigation in section 7.3. So we sort of came up with a different term, but it's essentially the same idea, right? If the project will increase an existing burden, the applicant needs to consider project design considerations or measures that would, reduce or eliminate that burden. DEP 24 also requires enhanced public participation, like John mentioned a few minutes ago. So applicants for projects that are subject to DEP 24.1 are required to prepare an enhanced public participation plan. That's what John was talking about that we're working on. And then the applicant would then solicit input from members of the community, like you all, on the proposed, project design considerations and other aspects of the project itself. That's it. That's what I got. That's the quick and dirty overview of air permitting, and CLCPA.
Thank you so much for fitting all that in. I know some folks in the chat were like getting bogged down with the wonky stuff, but I think for those of us that want to effectively engage on this, this kind of wonky information is really useful. So we did have a bunch of questions that came up in the chat, and I think these will be for Mark and for John. And I do want to maybe ask in advance, and I'll reach out to Kelly Turturro. We're not going to get to all these questions tonight, so we'll compile them and email them, and hopefully Kelly will be able to respond.
Absolutely. Absolutely, Courtney. You can, if we can't get to them, if people have to run, we will most certainly answer any question we can if you want to compile them and send them to Kelly and I. Absolutely.
Great, thank you. Yeah, we're gonna have to do that for some of them. So I think Paul had asked, can someone share the law with me that exempts Wheelabrator from having an expired air permit, even though it is publicly listed as expired? And it is on the website that lists all your Title V permits, like the issued permits. It does list an expiration date, but I think that they did touch on that. Paul, if you need more clarification, let us know. Lila
I'll send you that, Courtney. I'll send you the link to the law. It's New York State Administrative Procedures Act. And I can send you that link with a package answering all the questions, including that you can share with your group.
Great, thank you. And then Lila was asking, what does it mean when a permit status is, quote, renew, treat as new? That was in that one slide I showed where it kind of was like the screen grab from the website.
Was that
like,
from?
I guess.
Go ahead.
Lila, do you want to clarify?
Sure. So internally, we have a bunch of statuses that sort of document applications just in our internal system. Renewal, treat as new. So Title V permits under the Clean Air Act, renewals are treated as new applications. That's in our Part 201. That's in Part 621 also, I believe. But that's the status we use to sort of track those. That's what that means. And what it does is it'll make it go through public notice and all that sort of stuff. That's
okay. Because really, I put in a FOIL request, which I'm still weeding through and making copies of. But when I had looked a couple weeks ago, I really thought that status had said there was an application for renewal put in originally that they had withdrawn, and then they submitted another one. It's not showing that anymore, so that's why I was asking about the treat as new. And you're saying that's just part of the Clean Air Act, but it does have to be reviewed as if new under current law and standards, not we're looking at a renewal that's going to use old law because this is not considered to be a significant enough change.
correct. Yeah, that's the case for all air permits. Whenever we renew them or modify them, it's based on whatever current law and standards are.
Thank you.
That brings up a question that I had, which is, do you do any analysis, for instance, the BASF plant in Peekskill, the permit was issued in 2012. Like, how different are air emissions standards in 2024 from 2012?
I'm not super familiar with that particular facility, so I can't really speak to that right now, what they're subject to and that. Regs do change.
Well, they have a Title V permit. So like, just, I guess in general, like, what were the rules? How do the rules from 2012 compare to the rules for 2024?
Yeah, it really depends on the rule. There's hundreds of federal regulations that apply very specifically to specific types of facilities. So if EPA has revised one of those, then they'll be different. If they haven't, then they won't be. But since I'm not familiar with that particular permit, I'm not sure if any of the rules that it's subject to have changed in the past.
What about, well, then for Wheelabrator, like, their permit was issued in 2016. So in the intervening, years, how have the air emissions standards changed?
They have not. There is currently a federal proposal to change them that's working through the EPA rulemaking process as we speak. I don't know what their EPA schedule is, when or if it will be finalized and what it'll look like, but their proposal, you can search for it. It's on the, it's posted on their website. It was in the Federal Register a couple months ago. Something like that.
And our standards here in New York State don't apply or haven't changed, or what?
The state reg has also not changed.
Sorry, you just got muted by accident, Mark.
You're muted, Mark.
Good.
Yes.
Yes.
All right. So the state reg has also not changed in many years. The federal standards do supersede our state rule. They're more stringent. And also Wheelabrator predates the applicability of our state rule.
So they are not subject to New York State emissions.
Right. They're
rules?
subject to the federal standards. Yes.
Not good news for us, those of us that breathe it, I think. Let's see.
I
So
encourage you to take a look at the federal proposal. I don't know if it's still open for comment at the moment. But EPA is proposing to reduce those standards significantly.
let's see. Sue asked, why can't we mandate food scraps collection and provide curbside pickup? And we can, like Westchester County can mandate food scraps recycling. They just choose not to. Terry, you have your hand up. Do you have a question?
Yes, I do. Yeah, I understand. Well, I sort of understand what you're saying, that the air permit technically is not expired, but it's been a long time, especially for BASF, which is also one of our major polluters in the area, and even for Wheelabrator. And now I also can understand that with the CLCPA, it's sort of back to the drawing board with some things, but leaving out that issue, I mean, how do you justify allowing what are essentially expired permits, these major polluters to operate with what are essentially expired permits to keep operating for such a long time, 3 years and 7 years. I mean, that's a very long time. I mean, I know there are very complicated technical issues and all that, but even so, that is a very long time. Why couldn't these things be resolved earlier?
Sure, thanks. I'll look in. I'm not familiar with BASF. We can look in that. I was focused more on Wheelabrator, but I think you hit the nail on the head with CLCPA. What were very complex reviews to begin with are even now more complex. And there's a lot more involved. There's a lot more analysis. There's a lot more back and forth between the department and the applicant to do these analyses. So it is taking more time. And as I mentioned, due to SAPA, they have a valid permit that they can continue to operate under.
Is there no public, oh, sorry, Terry, I was just gonna ask, is there no public recourse? Or like, how do residents kind of, I guess, like force New York State, DEC, EPA to act? Like, can these permits just indefinitely forever and ever sit in this SAPA protected expired status?
The department has an interest in proceeding with the review. We don't want permits sitting in what we call SAPA protection for long periods of time. We recognize that, but we want to ensure that we are doing a thorough review and have appropriate conditions in permits to be protective of health and the environment and the community.
How do you know that a polluter isn't just intentionally slow walking a permit renewal to avoid scrutiny?
When we request additional information as we go through this renewal process, we can and do give deadlines, so they're not just hanging out there for long periods of time. We request information and put deadlines to submit it by.
Yeah, it's also important to keep in mind that we still are required to do all of our usual compliance work. We're still inspecting the facility. We're still reviewing they're still required to submit their periodic reports. We're still reviewing all of those. All that stuff still goes on, even though the permit is SAPA extended. So it's not like we're ignoring them completely.
Okay, let's see. Raya Salter asked, when will the administrative extension be reviewed by the DEC? What are the next steps?
I'm not sure I understand.
Hi, I'll come off. So, and I've asked this of DEC folks before, but so it's under SAPA because it's being extended in lieu of expiration. But it's the same question folks have been asking, when will the DEC pick this up? And what will be the next steps on actually moving forward with processing it?
So I just want to be clear that the department is processing it. We are reviewing it. Our team has been going back and forth with Wheelabrator on different analyses. The work is being done. The next step is Wheelabrator's outreach through the enhanced public participation plan to ensure that there's significant public engagement. We anticipate that soon, very soon. And
all right, so that part of is part of the process. So you're in the process. So
absolutely.
That, and then what will be the next step after that? I guess that's what myself and others are just sort of wondering. When are we going to get to this point of a review of this permit where this decision point is going to have to be made?
That would be after we do after Wheelabrator does the enhanced public participation plan and outreach. We want to get a sense of community engagement and comments as before we continue our process. But so our process, if we issue that notice of complete application, comes after this enhanced public participation plan and outreach.
I see.
All right. Is that all, Raya?
Yeah, I guess I'm hearing you say that it's sort of things are moving forward in the near future.
Yes.
And we need to sort of stay with folks, and in part because the reason there are all these additional, requirements under the CLCPA is to reduce emissions and protect communities and close facilities like this. It'll be hard to see reissuing a permit of this facility as being consistent with Section 7 of the CLCPA. And I understand that there's a lot of challenge there, but thank you for laying everything out for us.
Absolutely. Thank you for your involvement.
All right. Vitala has her hand up, and then I think after Vitala, I'm going to read one more question from the chat, and then we're going to move on, and we'll send any unasked questions to John and Mark and get back to people about it. So Vitala, go ahead.
I want to thank John and Mark for coming tonight, and just it's following up with what people have been saying, but really just want to encourage them to think about a timeline, because I mean, we're seeing in many other venues in government and legal cases and stuff where people just find all kinds of ways to drag stuff out, like ad infinitum. And I think we need to think about what our recourse is as citizens to speak up if this keeps going on, because it shouldn't. We need, if a permit expires, then it needs to be addressed because it's faulty in some way. So I just really want to thank Mark and John and encourage them to know that the public is sitting here going, let's get a timeline going. Thank you.
Thanks, Vitala. So Sue from Yonkers had a couple of comments that I want to read. So she said, Mark and John, please keep the people of New York State safe from polluters, and thank you for taking your job very seriously. And then her question was, what are you most proud of in your work?
That's a great question. I wasn't expecting it. I'll go first. Working for the people of the state of New York. I'm homegrown from New York, from the Hudson Valley, and I love serving the people. I love the public engagement when we go out to notice with so many other permit types beyond air Title V's. There's a lot of other permits that we work with, and engaging the community is great. It's great when the community actually has interest and raise their concerns and ask questions. It's really feels good to explain what we do and how we help protect the health and the environment of the people of the state of New York and the Hudson Valley. Love it.
Mark?
This is a good question. Well, I talked about DAR 21 a few minutes ago. That is my baby. I wrote it with help from lots of others. The division of errors approach to CLCPA in general is something that I've been heavily involved in since 2020 when CLCPA was signed. Me and my staff have looked at least several hundred CLCPA analyses since then. We're working really hard to keep them consistent, to make sure that folks are required to do the same things, to provide the same level of detail. And that was honestly and is a massive effort. So it's not, in addition to everything else that we're already required to do by EPA and state law. So I'm proud of getting that going and being able to manage it in existence in addition to all of our other tasks as well.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for coming. I know we're a tough crowd, and sometimes as the public facing folks, you bear the brunt of people's frustrations, but I also have to say it is refreshing to have employees of the great state of New York turn their cameras on for a meeting, because I cannot tell you how many meetings I go to with folks from various offices that will not turn their camera on. And so it's really nice to see your faces. And I thank you very much for your time this evening and answering all our questions. So with that, if I know we're at time, if folks can give us maybe 5 more minutes, we've got some next steps and some updates. So with this, I'd like to kick it over to Lila to talk about our ongoing efforts right now.
Hello, everybody. So I will say right away, I used to work for Riverkeeper and I ran our watershed program department. So I am used to Clean Water Act kind of cases and pollution cases in general, but air permits are totally new to me. So to help WAS kind of figure out where we are in this process and everything else, because it is very long, ongoing, there's many parties to all of this. We did put in a FOIL request, so we are going to gather all the documents that we can access about the expired permit and this permit review, so we can be more familiar with the science and what's going on, and we will all be able to really have a better sense of how to participate when the public comment period is open. In addition to that, we are trying to grow our coalition. Wheelabrator is only one incinerator. When Waste owns and operates the incinerator that's up in Dutchess County as well. So we're starting to make outreach with folks up there who are working on similar issues. We would ask all of you to, have a future push. Push Governor Hochul to halt operations at facilities that have no renewed permits in a timely manner. In addition, we're going to stay on top of the county's RFP for the zero waste consultant that we were very happy that they agreed to hire. And I would just like to say to folks, while we may talk about this foil or trying to weigh in, I think we want first to, as people are saying, our government officials are doing a difficult job, and with the county and with DEC, I always say it's our job to support what they need first, but we are the public who deserves, access to information, and it is a conversation we will all have together and work towards goals. So.
Great. Thank you, Lila. And for folks who don't know, FOIL stands for Freedom of Information Law. So some of the things, some of the details in the communications, DEC doesn't just give out freely. You have to go through that process to get. So thank you. So this gets to the action items of the night. So if Lila can drop this Action Network link into the chat, we have, we're trying a new way of sending our emails. So instead of you having to go into your email account and copy paste, we're using Action Network this time. So you can just put in your information and it will generate the emails. So we're writing to Governor Hochul, the DEC commissioner, the deputy commissioner for environmental justice, the regional director, Kelly Turturro, and our county executive and deputy county executive are going to be CC'd on this, basically calling out these expired permits in Peekskill and calling on the governor to instruct the DEC to halt operations at these facilities until they can meet the current standards and get their permit process to the public input position. So please click on that link. It's in the chat now. It takes just a second to type in your info. You can personalize the email that it will send if you want to include info on why this is important to you, and then hit submit and it'll generate those emails straight away. The other action item is an in-person opportunity. So there is an opportunity at every Board of Legislators meeting to provide public comment. And so WAS would like to get a big showing to the next Board of Legislators meeting on Monday, September 16th. To basically ask questions like, where is this, what's the status of this RFP? Where are the updates? And then we want to renew our calls for them to set the goal of ending incineration. We really think that we're worried they've watered down the RFP and that they're not setting a goal of ending incineration. And in that case, our 90,000 taxpayer dollars will really be wasted, and they will just be further kicking the can down the road and not addressing this when we have a 40-year-old incinerator and we need to be planning ahead. So you have to show up a little early for the meeting to register to speak. We will provide you with a script that you can use verbatim, or you can modify, or you can come up with your own comments. And you can comment via email as well. We will be sending all of this information out in a follow-up email after this meeting, but mark your calendar for September 16th. We'd really like a strong showing so that our county executive and our Board of Leg know that we're watching this process, that we really care about this, and we want them to do the right thing, and we want them to set this goal of ending incineration. So with that, I will hand things off to our summer intern, Annika Bott from Rye Country Day School, to talk about the work she's doing for our September Zero Waste Task Force meeting. Annika, go ahead.
Thank you. Yeah. So for the next September Zero Waste Task Force, which will be Wednesday, September 18th, we would love to get some student voices involved in student projects. So I have my email listed on the slide. If you could send me an email of contacts of students working on projects within Westchester County or Greenwich, Connecticut, related to environmental justice, and anything slightly related to the Peekskill incinerator, as well as, yeah, environmental justice. But anything would be great, and just getting more student voices and seeing that this issue is important for the youth as well is going to be really important. So we're excited to get some emails, and yeah. And if you have any questions, you can also email me as well. That's all.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Annika. We're looking forward to hearing from our young people on this issue in September, back to school. And an important note, our meetings are the second Wednesday for September. The second Wednesday is September 11th. We are bumping to September 18th. That also gives our students a little bit more time to get back to school and get prepared. So with that, I thank you all very much for your time tonight. A big round of applause for John and for Mark for coming and giving us this information and having this discussion. And thank you all for your time. We'll be putting the recording up as soon as we can, and we'll follow up with DEC for all those good unanswered questions that were in the chat. So have a good night, everyone. Thank you all for your time and for your advocacy. And I hope to see you in person on September 16th.
Thank you,
Have a
Courtney.
good
Thank
night.
you all.
Thanks, John. Thank you, Mark.